Good morning, everyone. I want to thank you guys for all being here. For those of you online, I know the volume and the sound may not be the greatest of qualities. Greg is in the process of getting that changed. So the next time we have a class presentation like this, we will have better equipment. I want to again thank you guys for being here. Please, if you haven't already, silence your cell phones. If you've got to take a call, we'll ask that you step out of the class. I want to thank Mr. Samuelson for coming to do this for us. Like a lot of appraisers, you guys know that he's extremely busy. So for him to take some time out of his schedule to meet with us and do this for us is greatly appreciated. So thank you, Fred. Appreciate it very much.
Glad to.
Also, he hasn't charged us yet.
I'm like an elephant. I work for peanuts.
So, if for those of you that don't know, Fred's been, how long have you been in the business appraising?
48 years.
48 years. Fred has helped me out over the years. I've gotten together with him a number of times to help with CMAs and pricing and so forth. So I wanted to reach out to him in this crazy market that we have and have him come in and help us with some stuff that will hopefully answer a lot of questions. For those of you that are online, if you have questions, put them in chat. Greg will help address those here in class. You guys have the green sheets there in front of you. Fred will be talking about that. I've also given you guys some question slips. What I'd like for you to do, a couple of them, as we go through class, write your questions down. Fred has a lot of material to cover, and so we want to try to keep the class going. But we do want to get to as many questions as possible. So if you have questions, just write them down and hold them up, and I'll come and get them. Other than that, Fred, I think that's about it. So thank you very much for being here. I do greatly appreciate it. And I'm going to now turn it over to Mr. Samuelson. Oh, wait, Greg's got one more thing. Yes. Yeah, if you are online, please mute yourselves because we can hear what comes across. So I'd greatly appreciate that. Fred, it's all yours, sir.
Thank you. I figured we'd probably have a really serious discussion today, so I thought we would set the tone early. Thank you, Greg and Lance, for asking me to come. It's always a privilege to come to a sales meeting. You came to learn some things from me, but I also came to learn some things from you. You are the ones who are on the ground, so to speak. And I call agents many times and ask them, how did this transaction work? Or what do you see? How did you price this house? And things like that, because you deal with buyers and sellers every day. I don't really talk to them. I have to interpret and information that's given to me. So when I started out a few moons ago, I actually started out as a salesperson, and I still maintain my sales license. Come this fall, I will have had that license 50 years. One of these days, I'll figure out what I'm going to do, but I'm still working on it. And I was 10. Yeah. It's, when I started, had gotten out of the Air Force and I was looking for a job, and I was reading the help want ads, and there was a little 2-inch ad about that big, said salesman wanted, Herndon Homes. That's all it was. I told my wife, I said, I don't have a clue. I'll just go down and talk to him and see what it's all about. So I went in, Herndon Home, Joe Herndon, and sat down at his desk, and we chatted for about 10 minutes. And he said, I think you can sell. He pulled his desk drawer open, pulled out a little pad about that big, and he wrote my name on it, and he signed it. And he said, here's your temporary license. Go sell something. And he handed me a pad of contracts, and I left the door. And that was back then, you could sell with a temporary license. The next day, I went out to McConnell Air Base. You could get on the base back then. I went to base housing. I was going to put up a little card. There was a young couple in there. They had just come to town, and they were talking to base housing. They needed a place to stay. They needed a hotel for the night, and their car was not working well. They needed to get it out to the dealership to get it fixed. So I just kind of being an opportunist stood around, and when they were finished talking to their Air Force person, I said, can I help you? I said, if you're looking for a house and some things, I said, I'd be glad to help you. And they opened up to me, and I took them to a motel, got them a meal, and the next morning I got them out to the dealership to get their car worked on. Within 2 days, I sold them a house. So I sold a house my first week having it. Now, I can't tell you that I sold one every week after that. You know how it goes. You sell 4 in 2 weeks, and then it's 4 weeks before you sell 2 more. So anyway, been very blessed and appreciate the opportunity to do that. Um, I just a little bit of background beyond that. I am currently a member of the Kansas Real Estate Appraiser Board, and I have chaired that commission for a couple of years. So I've been very blessed to see. Uh, I worked for Savings Loan for a while, so I've made the full circle of everything that goes on in the business. And I was talking earlier, I think all appraisers ought to sell for a couple of years before they ever start appraising. There's a lot goes in a transaction, and unless you've been a part of it, you don't really understand. Um, if a number comes in $100 less, then you got to go to buyers and sellers and rewrite contracts and do all sorts of things. And that used to happen years ago. I mean, not so much anymore, but you need to understand the process that's going on. The other side of that is that you need to understand the appraisal process. When I started out, I had a form like this. I had 1 page, a list for 3 addresses down here of comps, but no adjustments. So I just wrote down 3 addresses, wrote my number at the bottom, and signed it. That was an appraisal back then. Computers came along, Fannie and Freddie came along, and with their forms, and so that's where we are today. Some of it's good, some of it we still don't appreciate too much. Um, I usually start when I talk to agents. My meeting is about a story or two, and I'm not going to take time with that this morning. But I've got snake stories, I've got dog stories, I've got cat stories. You name it, I have been there and probably experienced it by now. However, the fun thing about this business is every day you find something new, right? My biggest issue these days is people can't hang up their clothes. They can't clean up their houses. You're all shaking your heads like, we know. It's especially true on a refinance when I go in, sales, if they know they're going to show the house, maybe they'll make the bed. But when I go in, some rooms I can't get in because their clothes are stacked too high if it's a refinance. They don't even appreciate the fact that I'm coming. I have given you a handout today, and I'll go over that in just a second. One of the things you probably came today and hoping I would hand you a hot list with some numbers on it so you can fill out your sheets. Sorry, I forgot it. What I want to do today is help you understand where the numbers come from so you can do your own thinking, get to your own conclusions. You'll go a lot further and you'll make a lot better answers than working from a hot sheet. The thing about numbers, every property is different. So the numbers change and there's no way to make a number give you a sheet like that. So we'll go over your guidelines here in just a second and we'll cover some of those things. So anyway, we've had enough seriousness. I'm through with that. Okay. Just to start with, when we get done, you can ask questions, but next week, 2 months or whatever, if you have a question about a deal, give me a call. I'm always happy to talk to you. May not have an answer, but we can certainly talk through a situation. And it just helps me to talk to you because then I kind of get in my mind what I need to go over.
Real quick on that, what I will say on that is he's being very honest about that. A couple years ago, we listed a farm property out by Cheney Lake, and we had 4 different outbuildings, ag buildings, and a mother-in-law quarters, if you want to call it that, on this acreage. And so we're like, how do we figure out the value for each individual building? So I reached out to Fred, and Fred was able to let me know kind of a guideline of what we should look for, price per square foot based on what each ag building had, whether it had concrete, had water, if it was dirt floor, the size, it was the type of construction it was. It was a huge help. So when he says if you need help, Don't inundate him because he's busy, but if you've got serious questions and concerns, don't hesitate to reach out to him. He's one of the very few appraisers here in town that will do that for you.
One question that I start meetings with sometimes is, and I'll just do it all to you. Can you all say yes? Because that's the answer to the question. And the question, so what is the question? Can you talk to an appraiser? And the answer is yes. We kind of got the feeling years ago that no, you can't talk to an appraiser. You can't deal with him. The only appraiser that can't get involved, or the only person that can't get involved in our deal, is the loan officer that took the loan application. You all get that? Anything else is fair game. We had misconception years ago, but I think most everybody understands that now. And I'm going to give you some more on that here in just a minute. But you can give an appraiser input, and they can talk to you. If you go read the Fannie Mae guidelines, their quote Q&A section, there's actually, I think it's number 53 or something like that, that says that an appraiser should contact an agent because they might have valuable information. Duh. Right? Who else? Many times I call agents and say, where did the price come from? How did you get there? Do you have any comps that I don't know, that I can't find? Cash, for example, other things that can go on in deals. My job is to find out as much information about a transaction as I can. We get copies of the contract and I read those. Sometimes there's a car left in the garage or a trip to Branson in the miscellaneous section or whatever. Seller's costs, all those things we have to analyze. So we try and get as much information as possible. I won't ask for a show of hands, but how many of you have never read an appraisal? If you haven't, you need to get a hold of a copy of one and read it so you understand. The reports that I fill out are 16 to 20 pages. Most people think when I leave the front door, I know what the number is, but that's not the case. As I was telling Greg earlier, I don't look up comps before I go to properties because I don't know what I'm going to find. And I don't want to get a preconceived idea of what I'm going to run into. Once I get there, I go in every room. I take pictures in every room. I take pictures of any maintenance items that need to be addressed. If the homeowner's in the house, I have a conversation with them. How long have you owned the house? What have you done? What improvements have you made? Tenants are real fun because they love to tell you everything is wrong about a house. It's the other way around with homeowners. But I want knowledge about that property. I want to be totally informed when I get done and go back and make my decisions because I'll make better adjustments when I get done. Okay, an appraisal report looks like this. Page 1 is basically basic information about the house. An appraisal is kind of like the old funnel, you know. You start out with general information, kind of like going to Royal Stadium. You want to go, you got a ticket with a number, seat number on it. Well, your first interest is getting to the stadium, right? Then once you get to the stadium, you need to find the section where you're going to sit, and then you need to find the seat. And that's what an appraisal is. I start out very general in the neighborhood. Then I get to the site section. Then I go down here and describe the improvements. When I get all of that information, then I can go to this page, second page, and make adjustments because I know what I'm dealing with. And that's what I gave you this morning in that sheet you have, is I gave you a copy of what we call a sales comparison approach. And I told Lance I'd come back someday and show you how we fill it out. I'm not going to do that today. We don't have time, but I want you to be aware of all of the areas that we can make adjustments in. I'm sure your CMAs don't have this many adjustments on it, but this is the extent to which we go to come up with a value. So we don't just go back and hit a button and say, you know, the number spits out. Most people think we do that, but it's not quite that simple. We go down through and go through all those. Lance, I'm going to go through here real quick, and then we'll go to questions. Okay, look in the far left-hand column of this sheet that I just gave you. You'll see at the top, it says feature and subject. Okay, in the feature column on the left, it says sale price. I get a copy of the contract. We are required by law to have that copy. not because we want to appraise to the value of that contract, but we want to know what happened in this transaction. Are there any unusual or unique features that need to be addressed? Are there any sales costs, any maintenance items? Are there any requirements? We need to do all of that, and we can do that through a contract. Also, it has the name of the parties involved, which we're required to put in a report. Then it says sale price, the sales price per square foot. I'll talk to you about in just a minute. Skip on down a little bit. Sales or financing concessions. Sales and financing concessions. If somebody pays seller's cost in our market, we adjust for it. If the seller pays $3,000 of the buyer's cost, then when we use that as a comp next time, the seller didn't really get the 100,000 if it was listed for that, did they? They got 97. But on the other hand, if a contract is written for 103,000, who paid the seller's cost? The buyer did. They borrowed them, didn't they? So that's why we take them out. We what they call getting back to cash. What would a cash buyer pay and what would the seller get? So we do deduct those, and I think you need to have that in mind when you price houses, because especially when you get into FHA and VA properties, almost all of those have seller's costs. So if you're pricing a house and three other houses in the neighborhood had $5,000 seller's costs, you need to take into account yours probably is going to have seller's costs as well. You need to prepare your seller, and you also need to keep that in mind when you price a house. Location, sometimes we adjust for that. If your house backs up to a cement plant, probably going to get a negative adjustment. On the other hand, if your house has a nice view of the golf course, you're going to get a positive adjustment for that. The size, lot size, sometimes, especially in acreages, you're on 5 acres. I might use a comp of 10 or 15 or 20 acres. Now, just because there's a size difference doesn't mean there's a dollar difference. Y'all get that? It might be that a 1 acre site sells for the same thing a 10-acre site might sell for, even though they are different sizes. So you got to have that in mind while you're going down through this. Lease fee, we won't get into that today. Size, view. Yeah, view is important, isn't it? The things you can see. Design and style. Sometimes I have to use a quad level against a ranch. Or maybe I've got the only contemporary house in the neighborhood and everybody else is traditional or whatever. You can deal with that there if you like. The quality construction is a kind of a free-for-all number. You can put lots of different things in quality, but you need to understand if your house just has standard quality, builder quality, and somebody down the street has gone in and upgraded, how much more is the upgrade? And are the buyers in that neighborhood, are they looking for the upgrades? Or are they willing to settle over here? Lots of things in that. The actual age, we put in the actual age, but there's a thing called effective age. And I'll describe it to you this way. You might know somebody that's 50 years old, but they look like they're 75. But you might know somebody that's 75 and they look like they're 50. So they might be 75 years old, but their effective age is 50. Did y'all get that concept? All right. I won't get any. Condition's a big one. We'll use numbers anywhere from C2, 3, 4, and 5. And instead of average, good, and all of that. And when you see a report, that explanation's in there. The room counts, we make adjustments for baths. I rarely make an adjustment for a bedroom. However, if you're in a neighborhood where every house in the neighborhood is a 3-bedroom, except one of them has a 4, does that 4 carry any weight in that neighborhood? Or maybe it's a 2. Does the 2-bedroom get a deduction because it's the only one in the neighborhood? Then functional, I hope you understand that one. There's lots of things about houses I don't think are functional. I did a $500,000 house the other day and the laundry was in the basement. Guy built it that way. I don't know. Maybe that's okay with you, but that's not how I would build a house. Used to be years ago. Energy efficient items. Greg, let me give you one thought here. I hope you don't mind me chatting. Be careful with energy efficient items. Okay. The homeowner might say, my bills are this, or I've got a solar panel on the roof and I got this much less. I'm paying this much less. That's fine. If they're doing that, let them write it down and let them be responsible for the information. Don't you tell people, oh, this is a great energy house. You need to prove to them, and the seller needs to support it with information. Don't get hung out there, because if a buyer moves in and they don't get the same savings, guess who they're going to call? So keep yourself out of that one. Garages, I'll talk about that in a minute. Porch decks, fireplaces, yard improvements, all that kind of stuff. We make adjustments for all of it. Does that sound like a lot of fun? There's 21 lines there that I have to look at every day, and it's a minimum of 3 comps. Sometimes I put 4, 5, 6 comps on. I put as many as 9 comps on a report sometimes, and I even add some listings on occasion. So anybody have a quick question about any of that? I just want you to have the background of the thinking of what an appraiser has to follow through. Okay.
Said something about the quality of construction, the effective age, and the condition, and kind of referred in my mind to similar attributes to
Following the unexpected death of his father, Chris Collins.
Well, they're kind of all in the same family, actually. You can deal with, you might deal in quality in another area. The effective age probably gets more closer to condition, because if somebody has gone in and remodeled or upgraded a house, then it appears to be newer or in better condition than another one that hasn't had any maintenance taken care of at all. Yes, I have done that. Yes. That's why there's two lines there. Okay.
So the question was the difference between effective age and condition, quality of construction. So that's what Fred was talking about, is sometimes he will make adjustments for both of them as you move forward on that.
When we adjust for size, we call it gross living area. If you look at that line might only be 20, 25, 30, 35, or $40. But the sales price per square foot might be 100, 110, 120. This line only deals with the bare bones of the structure. Okay, then we get into quality and add more value and other things down here, fireplaces, garage, and all of that. So if I put $100 across there, then if I added all the rest of this in, it's going to misrepresent what the value that's in that house. So that's why you'll see that number very low. Okay. Just the box framework of the house. Whatever the box is, that's what that number is. Everything that's in GLA, and you understand, gross living area is only what you can walk on. If you have big open atrium, that won't be in the square footage. Anyway, I always tell people, well, if you can walk on it, it's gross living area, but if it's heated, then we'll give it value. If you have a room that's not heated, you'll get credit for it, but not at the same rate that the house gets credit for. Okay, yours.
So one of the things I want to address, and it's one of the questions that we have here, by a show of hands, how many here actually use a price per square foot to help do your CMAs? Okay, so what I'm referring to is, if you've got one house, you've got 2 identical houses. I mean, everything is identical. Everything's the same size, same neighborhood, same number of bedrooms, bathrooms. Everything is the same. And one house sells for $100 per square foot, and it has a deck. And the house next door, what you're comparing it to, sold for the same price basically, but it doesn't have a deck. Does that $100 per square foot still make sense? If one house has more amenities, like a large deck on it versus the other one. So I'm going to ask. Well, no, what we're talking about is, now remember, so let's say you have 1,000 square feet, and you're figuring up what it's sold for is $100 per square foot. Can you apply that $100 per square foot on a home that has the deck when this one doesn't?
Well,
So that's
can
what I,
elaborate on that a second?
that's why I'm setting that up for you to address.
One of the things, if you look at that sheet at the top, it calculates $1 per square foot. But when all the adjustments are made and you get down to the bottom and the estimated value, that's a different dollar per square foot because we've taken into consideration all the differences of the property. So what he's saying is, I got this bucket out here that says it's $100, but there might be different things in every bucket, and sometimes that affects value.
So I guess what we're trying to get at is that instead of just automatically applying that $100 per square foot, what you need to do is make your adjustments based on that, what it has or doesn't have compared to your subject property, and then go in and figure it out. That's the hot sheet he was talking about.
I'll cover that in just a minute.
Greg?
One of the questions online is, Fred mentioned something about the difference between a two-bedroom house and a three-bedroom house. How do you qualify what the price difference is in the bedrooms if you're still talking about heated and finished living space?
Well,
so the question is, two bedrooms. I'm kind of a little confused about value of two bedrooms versus three bedrooms. If it's the same square footage.
I don't have an answer to that. I don't know. No, there's two or three things that go into that. I don't hardly ever rarely adjust just purely for a bedroom for this reason. Usually a 3-bedroom house will be larger than a 2-bedroom house. Okay. So if you adjust for the difference in square footage, you've already adjusted for the extra bedroom. Now, let's say you have a 1,200 square foot house. One of them has 2 bedrooms and the other one has 3. The 3-bedroom house is going to have much smaller bedrooms. And so is that a functional issue? So you branch into another little area you got to think about. What does your market respond to that? Do the people coming in to this particular neighborhood, are they looking for good size 2 bedrooms? Is that where 95% of the houses, that's the way they were built? We get into issues these days. A lot of houses just have 1 bedroom on the main level. When I get to that situation, then I go look in the basement. Are there more bedrooms downstairs? Well, in today's atmosphere, a lot of buyers would rather have 3 bedrooms in the basement and 1 upstairs for mom and dad, and the kids can have the basement. So that there is a market for that. There's a market for everything. You just need to understand and just make sure that you don't double adjust for some time. Now, if I think that I've got a 2-bedroom neighborhood and I got a 6-bedroom house, the buyers that I bring into that neighborhood, those extra 4 bedrooms probably don't mean much. And so they're not going to pay much for the difference. And I might make a functional adjustment. I could make maybe a quality. There's 2 or 3 places to make that adjustment.
So the question is if let's say you have houses in an area that have 1 bathroom and a room is converted into a half bath, making that subject property 1.5 baths.
Okay. Do the rest of the homes in the neighborhood have just 1 bath? Is that half bath an asset? But what did you take away to create that half bath? Did you take away a bedroom? Instead of 3 now, you just have 2. And I've seen a lot of people, they'll move the laundry into one of the bedrooms, so they've destroyed that concept. How does that fit in your marketplace? It always goes back. Every time I look at a situation in a house, I go back to my selling days. I've got a buyer in my car. We used to haul them around, by the way. We don't. You just get them in my car and drive them all over town. what are they looking for and what do they think's important and what are they willing to pay for? And so you've got to look and see, are you the oddball basic quote in the neighborhood, or do you have an advantage because you have a half bath? That might be an advantage, but what did you give up to get there? What's the adjustment? Uh, I can't give you a dollar amount, but you'll see maybe that house will sell for just a little bit more or a little bit less than its 2-bedroom contemporaries. I gave you general answers that close enough. Okay, Lance, I'm all yours.
Okay. One of the things, there's a lot of questions here that you guys have been submitting that are great questions. I think we're going to get to some of them, and if we don't, then we'll go back through these. So, in other words, there's a lot of questions here that we will get to address as we go through the information. Do you want to now cover what we talked about in regards to flipped houses or remodeled homes? How do you make adjustments for that?
Yeah, we can go down through your list. That's fine.
Are you okay?
Sure. No, I'm ready. Okay, basically, he's talking about remodeling. What do you do with remodeling costs? There's two things. One is dealing with the flipper. The other is dealing with a homeowner who's gone in and paid a price and then gone in and made improvements to the house. By the way, some appraisers tell you they don't want anybody around when they get there. I'm the total opposite. Keep the whole family there. I have questions. I want them answered. I want to know when I walk in, my first question is, how long have you lived in this house? Second question, have you made any improvements? That's before I go anywhere in the house. I want to know what I'm going to be looking for. And sometimes they'll walk through and they'll show me everything they've done. If it's an extensive list, I always ask them to provide a list for me. I'll give them my business card, and you should do this too.
If you're already not doing that already with your sellers, when you take the listing, ask them to fill out a sheet. They can handwrite it, they can type it out, however they want to do it. Ask them to write out all the improvements or changes that they've made to the property since their ownership, and then leave it for the appraiser on the kitchen counter. I've dealt with some other realtors in the past that say, "Oh, there's no way I'm going to do that. I don't want to upset the appraiser." You're not. You just heard it from Fred. That information really helps. So if he can see what has been done to the house without the sellers actually being there for him to ask questions, chances are it's going to help your pricing, not hurt it.
There's a couple of reasons for getting the list. Number one is when people pay $100,000 for a house and they spend $50 to fix it up, what do you think they think it's worth? That's part of the answer. At least the minimum is 150 because that's what they put in it. But what they put in it may or may not return value, and that's part of the judgment thing that you need to come across. The other thing is, if you make a list, what I always ask them for is, tell me what you did and how much you spent. A couple of things. Number one, I can determine whether the things they put in the house really do add value. And number two, I know what the homeowner's thinking about their value. And again, years and years ago, you used to think you could spend 50 and get 200 back. Not so much today. And for this reason, there's a thing that we call in the appraisal field. See, I was going to give you the exact comment. Well, I'll save that for a little later. But people generally won't pay any more for an item than it costs them to do it. So you think you spent $5,000 fixing up a bathroom? It's not going to add 10 grand because the buyer can get it done for 5. Why are they going to pay you 10? On the other hand, when a buyer comes into a house that needs work, what are they going to do? They're going to run up their own list. How much am I going to have to spend on this house to get it to my standards? And so if I see houses that need a lot of work, sometimes people ask me to go in ahead of time and do an appraisal and price a house that needs a whole lot of stuff. And I turn down those assignments on occasion, unless they have done a couple of things, unless they've gotten bids for the repairs or they've had a whole house inspection. That gives me another layer of information. So don't just sit there and try and figure out on your own. Go out and get information where you can, or sometimes you don't want. Shall I say this? Sometimes you don't want to take a deal. It's possible. Don't get yourself in trouble. Um, okay, again, the original purchase price plus the cost, and get the list, but get the cost. Sometimes people say, "Ah, I really didn't do anything." That happened to me this week. No, we haven't done anything. Start walking. Oh, a couple of years ago, we placed the furnace. It's got new windows, and a year ago, we did the roof. I mean, all of a sudden, we're up to $30,000 worth of stuff, and they told me nothing when I walked in the door. So that's why I like to have them around, have a little conversation going on. The other one is this: oh, furnace is new. Well, when did you replace it? 10 years ago. So get people to qualify their information that they give you. Uh, was uh, and so even flippers, I'll get information from them on what they paid for it, and they don't know it, but I can go back and find out in most cases because I can get into county records, I can go to Multilist, do a little homework if they don't tell me, but it's much easier. It also is they tell me a number and I go check it out in Multilist or whatever to see if oh, homeowners never tell you anything that's not true. I'm sorry. You got that one right. Okay, was the purchase when they bought it? Did they buy it under the market or over the market? Because that can affect where they are today, especially with a flipper. They may have paid 20,000 for a house that probably would have bought 50, but under the circumstances, they were able to get it for 20. So where do you start your dollar value on the house? At the 20 they paid or the 50 that it was really worth when they started? Don't get yourself in trouble by, at least you got to think about all that. Some items add full price. Some of the things that do add full price most of the time are fences, basement finish, um, and maybe some remodeling. But on the remodeling, don't get carried away. Don't remodel any more than the quality level of the house. Don't take a $50,000 house and fill it up full of granite. There are other choices. Don't put, $1,000 fixtures in the bathroom or whatever. And it goes for basement finish as well. When somebody finishes a basement and they finish it at a higher level of quality than the first floor is, people are only going to have a picture of the first floor. When they get downstairs, that's not what they're looking for. They're not willing to pay for the extra. So uh, keep all of your remodeling costs, level. Some items add full value, some don't. Part of it is market acceptance. Some neighborhoods, everybody in the whole market is putting in granite. So if you don't have granite, maybe that's going to hurt you. The buyer's going to at least deduct because they want what everybody else has in the neighborhood. So keep that in mind. Again, don't get above the quality level of your neighborhood, and the adjustments, fences, basement finish, return cost. You can look at the owner's list of the things they put in and see what they spent: new furnace, roof, spent money on a basement repair. Once a buyer gets in, they don't care. They didn't see the before. They only saw the after. So they can't make that judgment in their mind. Um, and then again, if you got a basement that's full of wall anchors or I-beams or cracks filled, you got to deal with all that as well. Okay.
What do you want to say? Is it, you started at 20,000 because they got a bargain, or the 50,000 was worth? What is that answer?
Well, I can tell you what the flipper's going to tell you.
But from your appraisal standpoint, or when we're trying to price it
I kind of want to understand why they got it for 20. I'm not going to get in their personal business, but was it a sheriff's sale? Was it an REO? There was something there that helped them, an auction, whatever. Uh, I always kid Lonnie McCurdy. We have some hard conversations sometimes. He said an auction is the true value of property. So Somebody paid cash. I say, that's nice, Lonnie. Now you want to hear my side of it? No. We always have fun having a conversation like that. The answer to your question is to just use reason and logic. Um, Part of it a little bit of it will depend on what they do to it. Some people just paint and carpet and they're done. Other flippers, they'll do appliances and all kinds of things. So you got to get at all that in your mind. I would tend to start with the 50 that it was worth, because just because he got a good deal, it's not fair to penalize him. Yeah. If it was truly, that's why you can go back to tax records, you can go back to previous sales, and work your way back. There's lots of things you can do to say, well, this house probably was worth more than he really paid for it. And then you can start there.
So one of the questions that's been brought up is when you have improvements or repairs made. So let's say that a seller went in and put a brand new roof on the house because it's old or it's had some hail damage on it, whatever the case may be. And let's say they spent $15,000 on putting that roof on. What I tell my sellers, and Fred, please correct me if I'm wrong on this, if you spend $15,000 for a new roof, you're supposed to have an operational roof. It's not supposed to leak. It's supposed to be operational. Now, it will help the marketability or the sellability of the home, but can I actually add $15,000 to your list price because you got a brand new roof? Same thing with windows. I had a seller a number of years ago on a little $80,000 house in Valley Center go and spend a huge chunk of change for putting in brand new Pella windows. And she knew that she was going to be selling it within a year, and yet she still did that, thinking that she had to do that. And when I talked to her, I said, why didn't you just put construction grade windows in? Because you got to have operational windows. They're supposed to work. And so her thought was, well, the better, I'll get more money out of it. She wanted me to take that amount that she spent on those windows and add it to my CMA. And I said, it doesn't work that way. So when it comes to repairs or functional items of a home, how do appraisers adjust? How do you address that?
Well, there's a thing called cost cure, and that goes to his question. You have bad windows. What should you pay for new windows? And builder grade or two grades up from builder, probably you would get a return out of that. But Pella windows, no, because they're not common for the neighborhood. They're not accepted. The neighborhood will not pay more for those items. And you can go look at how many other houses in the neighborhood have Pella windows? Probably none. Again, going back to any improvement like that you want to put in a house where they spend more money than they really should. I see people putting in furnace systems that just, over the top. Well, they needed a basic heater. That's all they needed. As far as the roof's concerned, as long as you can get it insured, that's about all I care about. I don't make rarely do I make an adjustment strictly for roofs. Now, in some neighborhoods, they're transitioning. Some neighborhoods are in transition from maybe all wood roofs to now their composition. Did I get that word? Composition. Thank you. It's still early in the day, guys. So your house still has a wood roof. Is it going to get penalized because there's wood? Does the composition, even though it might cost less, really provide more value to this house? Wood roofs, sometimes you can't even get them insured. So, that's an issue to deal with as well.
So with that being said, Fred, if let's say my seller has gone in and just put the standard basic windows in, they replaced all the windows, or they've put a new roof on it, when I'm working at my CMA, should I bump my price up a little bit because they're new items, or go with that argument that you're supposed to have an operational roof or operational windows, and that'll help the sellability of the home?
What if you walked into that house and they had a list price or whatever, and they started telling you all of the things that they've done to the house? Would it make any difference to you? How much? Some buyers it will. Some buyers could care less. It's there, but I'm not going to pay you any extra for it. It was really thank you for doing that, but I wouldn't have done it. So I would have spent $2,000 on a window, and you spent five, so it's only worth two to me. Um, a little bit of this depends on the price range you're working in. Uh, if I'm in a $100,000 neighborhood, builder quality windows are fine. But if I'm a $1 million neighborhood, I better be putting Pellas in that, or else the value goes down. I've seen houses. One lady complained to me. She built $1 million house. She had picked a builder, and she told me later. She said, this builder doesn't know how to build $1 million house. He just doesn't think at that quality level. And so deal with the price range that you're in and what's standard for the neighborhood, and is your neighborhood in transition. Years and years and years and years and years ago in College Hill, everybody had a gravity furnace. I haven't seen a gravity furnace in many years now because they've all transitioned over. But we went through a period where they were going from one to the next. And so, what's it worth? Again, a buyer's not going to pay you any more than they think it's worth, or their cost to cure.
The other thing I look at, and correct me if I'm wrong, is if you don't have operational windows or you don't have an operational roof per se, and I'm talking about functional items in a property, that's going to bring the value down. And that's how I explain to my sellers is if you don't have this working, it's going to bring the values down, not necessarily increase it. The next question I have in regards to upkeep is a lot of us realtors here in the office have talked about this, is when you have someone that goes in, whether it be a flipper, and let's put flippers on the side, let's talk about sellers who spend some money on remodeling a kitchen. They go in and they put quartz countertops in, put new flooring in, all new cabinets, or they remodel a bathroom that, you get rid of that green tile that's all the way around, and they really doll it up. Do you make an adjustment for that? Is it above average or above average as far as condition, et cetera, et cetera? Explain that.
Well, here's the challenge to an appraiser, and to you too as well. Some people might remodel a bathroom and turn out and there's tile floors and walls and ceilings and everything else, and they have basically spent more money than you could have put down on. There's all kinds of flooring you can put down, painted the walls or whatever, maybe changed out a fixture or two and made it look nice. So have they gone in and over improved the property? There, and how much will they pay? It's hard to call for this reason. I can adjust based on what I think they maybe have overspent for the property. But in our multi-list system, we don't have enough fields to answer all those questions. If there was a field for bathroom quality, condition, or whatever, and then another one for kitchen and cabinets and appliances and all that, then I could look at the comps, and I have information over here that I can apply to my subject. The best I can do is read comments in a listing and kind of get a flavor of what they've done in that house, because and you need to go in and say that so an appraiser can at least get a clue as to what's gone in that house. But I don't have enough detail that I get overly carried away. As far as an appraiser, I will work in generalities. I can look at pictures, for example, these days that help me a lot. And I'll look at the interior pictures of my comps and say, I have a pretty good flavor of what is in this house, and I know what's in my house. So I might make an adjustment based on the observation that I'm able to make because of the pictures. But if I wasn't able to do that, I would probably be more conservative with the adjustments that I make. It's the amount of information that you have that really gets you there.
I think if you haven't figured it out by now, it's really a case by case scenario, And what I do the same thing as Fred does. I will look at pictures. I will look at the remarks. If on my subject property, if I have a seller that has spent a ton of money on making improvements, and then I will look at the comparables that I have pulled and see if those properties have had similar changes. If they have, then I don't make any adjustments. If they haven't, then it's a gut feeling. And for those of you that are newer in the business, you will start getting this feeling. You'll start figuring it out. There is no magic number that you add. So if you got a remodeled kitchen, we're not going to add, oh, that's an automatic $5,000 increase. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. You have to just take a look at the things that they've done and take a gut feeling or figure out what it is that you think you should bump it up for those improvements.
When okay.
So the question was, the comment was, we now have RPR, and they RPR can make adjustments. By all means, you can use that. There are some cases where I've seen, and Brenda, I wish Brenda was here, she could comment on this. RPR, I have found recently, has been a little low in valuations, and so I may go in and take a look at it just to make sure that I'm not smoking crack with my numbers. And then the numbers come in low, and I'm like, okay, now I'm not sure. Brenda, hold on a second. Brenda, if you're still on, do you want to comment on RPR values real quick? Okay, so we'll move forward. Greg, go ahead.
Question online, I think is very appropriate, maybe in Hutch. Do you have a standard cost for what a third car garage is?
Yeah, that's one of the questions that we have here.
That was my next illustration.
Yeah. Okay, Sherry. Right.
Okay.
Okay, so let's wrap up this section on improvements. Do you guys have any questions in regards to improvements or repairs that have been made? So the question for those of you online is, if you have just a standard class 3 roof that's been placed on a house versus one that is maybe a 60-year shingle or class 4 or whatever, do you make an adjustment for that?
That is basically a marketing tool for when you describe your house, because somebody can say, I mean, then you could say the rest of the houses in the neighborhood are this. Your buyer may or may not be willing to pay for that, because it obviously would drive up the price of the house. I don't generally make an adjustment as long as a roof is a roof is a roof. Uh, I'd go nuts trying to figure out the different qualities of roofs that there are. I have no information to go by, and so I look at, if it gets insured and it's reasonably similar to the rest of the neighborhood, unfortunately, that's what you get.
So we are already coming up on 11:25, and so I want to get into his next section, and that is the adjustments that we've been talking about, like the additional garage and so forth. So I'm going to let you go through your stuff, and then I've got some questions here.
Okay, there's a term called paired sales, and that means that if you have two houses that are identical except for one feature, and they sell for different prices, you can figure out what the value is of that difference. If you have a house that has a one-car garage that sold for $100,000, and the house next door has a two-car garage and it sold for 105, what's your adjustment? $5,000. Now, that's real simple, but it doesn't work well in the marketplace because we don't have identical houses next door to each other. When you get into where there's what we call tract housing, there's a whole neighborhood full of sales. You can get a little better handle on something like that. But this house has these features, this house has different features, and they sold for different prices. So maybe the total of your adjustments ought to be this. It's kind of, and don't get caught up in adding up 10 items uh, and their value based on what one good feature might really give you this value. It might take 10 items, different items to get you there as well. So don't double up or overload on the value that you give your features. Again, don't overprice for your neighborhood. If you're in a $130,000 to $150,000 neighborhood, don't get your price up to 200. Now, I understand sometimes sellers say, "Here's my price. Do you want the listing?" That's your broker's choice. Okay. You do what the broker tells you. But the ultimate result of that generally is additional days on market. And days on market is a killer. These days, we used to look at 30, 60, 90 days as typical. I do reports these days at 3 days, 5 days, 1 day, well. So if I see a house that's got 60 or 90 days, I'm going to go say, all right, is it a feature issue? Is it a price issue? Why is that house so much more? And you all know days on market is a killer once it gets extended down the road. So that's the argument with your seller when you list, back to the CMA. How bad do you want to sell this property? And do I want to spend my money on advertising your house if you're not going to be reasonable? Uh, I don't have to answer those questions because I get to see it after the fact. Again, are you an over improvement? Price per square foot, as we mentioned, is a tool only. Builder's cost sheets. What do we adjust for? Y'all been in a new house lately? Usually you walk in and you can get a cost sheet from them, especially for basement finish. Most builders charge $5,000 a room for basement finish. How do I know that? Because I do a lot of plans and specs, blueprints, and I see their cost sheets. So I've got the advantage of being able to see what it costs to do something. But if you sell a house, for example, and want to do some more finish, the builder will come back and they'll give you a price for each one of those. Well, if it costs $5,000 to put a bathroom in a basement in a new house, and I'm going to put a bathroom in an older house, what is that number? Probably less than 5,000. 5,000 would be the max. So you can pick a number less than that. And if there's any depreciation, let's say the improvement's been in there for 2, 3, 4 years and has some wear and tear, it's certainly not worth the cost of new. It's worth something less. And you kind of have to test the market. Sometimes, going back to what you mentioned earlier, just because you fill out a CMA, the first number you put on there might not be right. You might have to go back and say, I adjusted for 5,000 here and 4,000 over here, but I'm looking at this whole general range, and maybe that adjustment ought to be 3 and 2. So don't get stuck just with the first set of numbers you put on. I sometimes set for 2 or 3 days looking at different adjustments that I've made, and I'll try some different ones to see what the bottom line looks like so I can get my range. Only because I'm trying to get my mind to think about what's going on. But use the builder cost sheets. If you want to know what the cost of some things are, y'all heard of Lowe's, Menards, those places? Walk in the door, look around. You can see what things cost and what people have to pay to go put them in your house. So there's different ways to do that, but just get you a builder cost sheet and lay it on your desk, and that'll give you some guides.
So we talked earlier a little bit about price per square foot, and so I'm going to ask Fred to. I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here. Sorry.
Don't we? We're done, are we?
Almost. Fred and I got together a number of years ago, and we sat down, and I wanted to talk to him about the price per square foot. So when we're all making our adjustments for, let's say you have a 1,250 square foot home that's your subject property, and you're comparing it to a house that's 1,300 square feet, there's a 50 square foot difference. You would think that 50 square foot difference would either raise or decrease the price of your subject property. So if you're going to take a price per square foot, not so much, but is there a formula or a secret number, or I don't want to say a secret number, but because it's going to change based on the age, what kind of adjustment do you make price per square? Is it like $20 a square foot, $25, and is it the same for basements?
I think I'm going to give him the same answer I gave you. I don't care what it costs price per square foot. It is a tool and certainly one you can use. I have a builder friend who says every house is $50 a square foot, regardless. a lot of times he's right, but in this day and age, it doesn't work. Um, the price per square foot is a guide. And again, I mentioned to you earlier on that sheet, what goes in the sale price is one number, but after you make your adjustments, the price per square foot is another number. I don't know of any standard numbers. I don't deal in adjustments that way. Again, I go back to the cost to cure as far as making adjustments are concerned. If you get into and your people argue values homeowners with me quite often. Well, that's $100 a square foot. My house is worth 150. There's just so much more that goes into that. Uh, it's a hard thing to do it that way. You're going to run into trouble if you do it that way. Can I comment on Zillow while I'm standing here now?
Please do.
It was brought up earlier. Okay. Y'all understand it's on the internet, it's online. Okay. I know everything's true on the internet and you should believe it, but don't believe it. Okay. Zillow does not have the cost or the price information that even we have. They can't get into our records unless they buy multi-list information. They can't get into the county like the appraiser does. If you'll look at a Zillow down at the bottom, they're pricing a house. It said it's estimated sale price. Oh, wait a minute. It has an actual sale price. And how come we're estimating? That means we don't know. So now, my only comment is this. Be prepared when you go to list a house because your seller has already been on Zillow before you get in the door. So you can go look at Zillow information and know what it says, but be prepared to defend your price and your value in your neighborhood because they're going to have that information. Don't cave into them. Be prepared so you can deal with it.
Recently, I had a builder build a 1,800 square foot home in the middle of $80,000 houses. We sold it for, so when he called me, I'm like, oh my God, what do I do with this? So I literally said to myself and the builder, new build in an average neighborhood is going for about $136 to $134 a square foot. Let's price yours under $100 a square foot to accommodate for the neighborhood. Is that anywhere close to what an appraiser would pay?
Well, you can do that and look at it as a tool and get a number. However, I would encourage you to look at more things than that. Look at the value range of the neighborhood. See what's,
That's why we priced it under $100 a square foot.
well, I guess my first question is, why did you do that? But
So I didn't have any problems.
no, why did he build a house like that?
Oh, that was his personal residence and then realized he wasn't gonna be able to sell it.
Yeah.
I want to say a quick thing to everybody. On that chart I send out every month, at the front has all the green, and on the back it's got all the different price ranges. I put the average dollar per square foot for each price range by $50,000. So like $0 to $50,000 last month, $20 a square foot was the average dollar per square foot in that price range. So if you're looking for a dollar per square foot that you're going to have one number for everything, it don't work. That's why I broke it down by range.
I
And
think
then
that's
Fred?
very good. That at least give you what I tend to look at are trends, and that will give you some a funnel to work on, and you can start there and then get down to here. So if you break it down, that's certainly better information than just a general number.
Exactly. And then Fred, we have a product called Cloud CMA.
Uh-huh.
And in Cloud CMA, when we're doing our CMA and it presents it, it shows what all those estimates were for those individual houses and how far off they can be up and down. So you guys have a tool in your toolbox to help you fight against estimates.
There's not just one answer. You need to look at as much information as you can and analyze it. That's what an appraiser is charged with, is gather as much data as you can and then make a reasonable decision.
So one of the other things I want you to just briefly touch on, because I know we're pressed for time here. So how many of you guys, by show of hands, have got a subject property you're getting ready to list and it is nearly impossible to find any comps? We've all been there? Okay. So here's my question for you. Do you go farther back in time or do you expand the area? And you and I have had this discussion before, so I'm going to let you address it with them.
Okay, the answer is yes and yes. Uh, when we do a report, they tell us to get comps less than 6 months. But if you have to, you go back a year. And so that would generally, in most cases, we stay under a year. However, if there are no sales in my neighborhood within the last year, I search 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 years. I've written reports with 5-year-old sales on them because that is the market. In this particular price range, in this particular style of house or condo or whatever it is, they only sell 1 or 2 houses every 5 years. So I will put on an older sale or two and say, here's where my buyer started or my seller or whatever, and bring it up to date. Then I would find alternate properties that I think my buyer might consider. In addition to that, again, I'm going back to the old real estate days. You got somebody in your car, they can spend $300,000. What are you going to show them? Everything that's in the $300,000 range is fair game to show them. Now, as far as distance, and you run into this obviously when you get into suburban properties, uh, you want to be as close as you can uh, as far as location, uh, lot size, as far as acreage or whatever. But the other thing I look at is school zones, school districts. For example, if I'm on a suburban property, everything that's in the Goddard School District is fair game to me. Uh, if I switch over, the other thing consideration is location to a town. If I have a house that's my town's here and I have a house over here, I can go way over here because it's the same distance from town. So I might consider houses all the way around that town because I know my buyer can still get to that one location. So there's a lot of factors you can look at that are common. Uh, on the back of your sheet, down at the bottom, under the grid, we have to report the subject. If it's sold in the last 3 years, we have to put that information on the report. Comparable sales, if they've sold in the last 1 year. So I'm always looking back 1 year on the comps and 3 years on the subject to see what the market activity is. So my answer to that is go as far away as you need to and as far back as you need to. Now, if your property, say, has certain kinds of outbuildings, I would look for another property that has certain kinds of outbuildings. Sometimes you're not looking at the big picture, you're looking at one feature. So I might get 10 different sales with 2 with this feature, 2 more of this feature, 2 more of this feature, and 2 more with that feature. So I've looked at the whole spread of what is available with, say, outbuildings or whatever's available, fenced properties, acreages, irrigation, whatever it is. And by the time you get all of those into your basket, then you have a lot of information to work from. You can say, well, in this neighborhood, we seem to be, this item's important. Is it important over in this neighborhood? And is it important to my subject? Compete them. One more thing, comment, I'll be done. When you price a house, I tell people, don't worry about old sales. Old sales, comparables. Why would I say that? Because if I was on your side of the fence, I would be more concerned about what my current competition is than something that sold a year ago. If you are putting your house on the market and there's 3 other houses, or let's say there's 10 other houses on the market at 100,000, what do you think your price range ought to be, regardless of your improvements? But if you're the only house in the neighborhood at 100,000, you might be able to ask 105 and get it. But if you're the one of 10 or 12, you may want to either wind up at listing at 95, 999 or whatever, or be willing to make a concession or two or whatever to beat your competition. You know what they say? The highest price in the neighborhood sells everything else underneath it. So keep, and again, I sometimes put listings in reports so I can tell the underwriter, here's my sales, but here's what's currently going on in the neighborhood. And this is what my house competed with when it sold.
So
we're going to get into escalating prices here in a minute. There's a couple other questions I want to address. Another question was, what values should we be adding for like a 2-car versus a 3-car garage? Bedrooms, bathrooms. You kind of address that. I'm just going to say, generally speaking, I think it's up to each individual realtor how we figure this up. I know Brenda and I have sat down and compared numbers, and her and I have actually made fun of each other for the numbers that we have for our adjustments. So if you're not sure, ask. Brenda's around, or you can always reach out to her. You can always come to me. I'll tell you what my thoughts are on it. But like Fred said from the very beginning of this appointment, or of this meeting, is there is no hot sheet. There's no magic number. If you've got a 2,400 square foot, $400,000 house, you're not going to make the same price per square foot or same adjustment for bedrooms as you would for a 1,200 square foot home. So it's a feeling. So I want you to just comment on that: bedrooms, bathrooms, garages, just the general changes.
One of the things you can look at, and you can look at these trends in multi-list. If you look at sale prices going on in your neighborhood, and you see one that's up here, or you see one that's down here, you want to look at those and say, why did they do that? If there's a glitch, as we call it, in the straight line, you want to go figure that out. As far as the cost of making those adjustments, again, bedrooms, I don't deal with a lot because the GLA handles that one. Other improvements, bathrooms, kitchens, oh my goodness, kitchens. People just put ungodly amounts of money in kitchens when you could have, or they've replaced the kitchen and they didn't need to. They could have done something to the cabinets or fixed them up. Sometimes new hardware makes a big difference. Just get it looking nice and presentable. Will affect your saleability. We use a word card, and underwriters ask me this all the time. What's the marketability of this property? How will it respond in the market? Does it have the features that are common accepted, or is it a really unusual thing that has features that nobody wants? When you get done, I got about 2 minutes worth.
The other questions are going to be stuff that we can do while we're eating lunch. So let's go ahead and finish out your escalating prices and so forth.
One of your questions about prices, I'm going to give you some comments about that. Again, I told you we look back in time, and you can go as far. Now, you may not wind up using it, but go back as far as you need to and go out as wide as you need to. Sometimes if you go to Valley Center, the Valley Center mailing district runs almost the way over to Benton. So sometimes if I put a report in that says Valley Center, it may be 10 miles away. But what I do is I say that this property would attract the same buyer pool as my subject. So the buyer pool, where will they go to buy? This house, this house. And so if I have a house here, but I got another one way over there, the other common element maybe is builders. They build the same plan all over town. You ever look at Klossmeyer stuff? He's got about 10 plans and he builds them all over the world. So I can look at that plan in one neighborhood and he built it over here. So I'm going to go over and see what he did in this neighborhood. Same plan. Is it priced differently? Sometimes it is, because this neighborhood's a little higher and he can add a few things to it. So look for the common features among all of your properties. Multiple contracts. Can I get into that real quick? Just that's the name of the game these days, and just use wisdom. Just because a contract is $5,000 or $10,000 or 20, I've seen those above the list price, doesn't mean that it jumped up 20 grand over yesterday's overnight. Because here's what's going to happen to you as an agent. If you sold somebody a house for $100,000 and they asked for the seller to pay the cost, the seller said no. So you write the contract for 105. So the buyer then, instead of having 100,000 in that house, he actually got a loan based on 105. Now, 2 years later, he comes to you and he says, you know what? I'm moving out of town. I got to sell this house. Okay. So 2 years ago, he overpaid probably by 10 grand. And then you're going to say to him, well, you know, I need 6% more because my broker's got to eat. So you want So in 2 years' time, that house could have gone at 10 plus another 6. So you're looking at a 11, 12, 15% increase in a 2-year period. Typically not going to happen, especially in our market, because you can look the most list trends, our prices aren't going up that quickly. So that's why you're probably getting appraisals. I mean, sometimes it's old data because I'm valuing today's market with data that houses that sold a year ago or whatever. So appraisers have to keep in mind what's going on today. That's why listings come into play. But keep in mind that you can make those adjustments and deal with but be sure you don't get people in trouble. I mean, I've seen houses where people can't come to closing. They didn't have any money to buy the house in the first place because they got 105% loan. Now you're asking them 2 years later to put cash in a deal to close. What do you do? So make sure they can close before you get a listing. Is that a good thought?
Look at the last time a property sold, when you go to do an appraisal, do you pull up the last time it sold and know that?
Absolutely. If it's 3 years or 5 years or 10 years, I always go in and do a multi-list search. I had a call from an attorney the other day. He wanted me to go back 15 years and value a house for a trust. So I went in and Googled, did my search in multiple, and I found about 10 sales 15 years ago. So that report could easily be done. Again, you got to remember, for a real estate appraiser, the lender's the client, not y'all. Sorry. They're the ones that going to pay me. They're the ones that order the appraisal. I'm looking out for their liability because they're the ones, that is a asset that they are going to base a loan on. That's their collateral. So they hire me or an appraiser to show them how much that collateral is worth. Again, financing comes in, look at your trends. And I always want to toss this in. Your broker makes your final decision. So always go to them.
You want to touch on how your industry is adjusting to these fast increasing prices?
Well, I tell you this, I'm glad I don't work in California or Colorado. I have friends in both areas, and especially Colorado. They're tearing down $1 million houses and putting up new ones because they just want the land, or there's nothing close by. I don't know how you deal with that kind of stuff. And the other thing is, our market is a slow climbing market. I mentioned to you earlier, when I first started, houses were increasing 1% a month. You just can't hardly keep up with that kind of stuff. So we're really in a pretty good state as far as working in our real estate market. I know that your houses aren't gaining value quickly, but on the other hand, you don't have a crazy market to deal with, and you can use comps, you can use listings, you can have a feel for the market and not really get carried away with it.
The reason this is brought up is last week, for those of you that were in that Zoom meeting we had last Thursday, we talked about prices increasing and so forth, and how do we adjust for it. And my thought, and I want you to correct me on this, is that our market has been increasing long enough now that the comps that we're pulling that have sold in the last 6 to 12 months are probably still pretty solid. You're not going to see a huge, gigantic increase, like he said, overnight in our market. So I'm to the point now where I think appraisers have pretty much caught up for the most part. Have caught up and are pretty fair. Do you want to comment on that?
Well, that's a very good observation. That we've kind of been at our other problem for about a year now. And and we've been in this market for a year. So some of those comps I'm using back then maybe will support higher prices now than they did when we first started all this. So excuse me, some of these things probably are catching up to a certain degree. But again, if you write a contract that's a couple $1,000 over list, 2 or 3, chances are the neighborhood's going to absorb that. It's when you get into those multiple layers. Agents have told me I got 6 more contracts waiting on this house. Well, I know, but I still got a lender here that's got to deal with this house for 30 years. Now, I don't know what the value is going to be 30 years down the road, but I know that the prices currently. Now, the other thing that's driving this is interest rates. I told you I've seen 17. Now we're at 2.5. I mean, if you told a buyer they were going to have to pay 6% interest, you know what they'd do? They go nuts. Well, I've never heard of that. Well, the only thing our rates have to do right now probably is go up. And when that happens, it'll probably slow our market a little bit. It slows market. It slows down what the extras that people will be willing to pay for. Builders see it because instead of building the same house with basement finish, they're going to build the same house with no basement finish to keep their cost level. So the market will adjust. So, we try to get, but your comments are correct in that I think that the comps probably are catching up to a certain degree.
So we talked a little bit about finding houses and how far back or how far out you should go. I know there have been a number of times for me, for example, I'll use an appreciation.
No, we should get it if you can send it there.
So what I wanted to ask you on that is using an appreciation rate a good way for us to work up some numbers?
Yes, it's another tool, and that's why it's great to look at the multi-list information that's put out. You can watch trends and see things are going up. Again, remember they're general in nature, so you have to decide where you fit in that line. But you can get 2 or 3 lines going. If the market's trending up, that's one thing. If the market's trending down, that's another thing. So you can watch those trends.
So, a show of hands, how many here would like to see us put a class together on how to figure up an appreciation rate? Okay, I'll start working with Greg on that and put something together on that. Well, I know, but you help organize it. So the other thing is, and Fred has talked about this. I know a lot of you were probably planning on coming in here and getting actual numbers to make adjustments and so forth. But again, it goes back to that same thing. It depends on the property, and it depends on the situation and so forth. As you can tell, there's not a set number. Yes, Greg. So yeah, I have that question written down in my notes.
I thought I was going to get out of here without answering that question.
So before we get into that, Greg, thank you for interrupting. But anyway, before we get into that, I know Brenda has put a CMA class together. On a show of hands, do you guys want to see another CMA class now that we've had Fred here on what type of adjustments we should be making so that our CMAs are within reason? Show of hands. Okay, I'll ask Brenda cordially if she would be kind enough to help out with that. Yeah, she is. So
She shut off.
okay, so what I would like to do before we jump into additional questions, lunch is here. I want to thank Security First Title for bringing that in for us, and Supreme Lending also brought the drinks and desserts in. So what I'd like to do now is we've got a list of questions here, and I want to ask them or ask Fred while we have lunch. So go ahead and help yourselves over here, and we'll start addressing questions as we go through. Does anybody have a quick question?
Besides Greg. Huh?
So my question, just so the people online can hear this, my question that I understand you saying is there a percentage increase that appraisers are using to help maintain the market? Is that kind of the... Mm-hmm. So the average sales price has increased about $35,000 from this time from last year.
Hey, guys.
Right. So and the reason I'm repeating your question so those online can hear it. So is there a percentage that appraisers are using to accommodate that increase, and is there a percentage that you guys are using to help rein it in a little bit so we don't have a bubble?
Well, in this business, there are no absolute things that we do. If you'll look on this grid sheet that I gave you, there is no line on there for a percent adjustment in the market. I don't have any way of making that adjustment. The only way that will occur is if the comps show me that needs to be done, which you're working with old data when you look at that. And if I look at the same comps, it should automatically go up. There are no guidelines of any kind that an appraiser should use this percentage or that percentage to make any adjustments at all. That's the appraiser's decision, how much market data they want to look
Okay, I'm
at,
so sorry.
how informed they want to be. And
Did
but
you need
the
me?
comps themselves will make that happen. I can't do anything different with it than what the comps tell me.
Okay, I'm going to start going.
There's not a percent guideline to follow.
So I'm going to start addressing some additional questions here that have been written in. So I appreciate all you guys turning these in. This is from Lynn. I'm already lunch order placed here. So here's the question for you, Fred. Most lenders don't know who the appraiser is. How would we discover who picked up the job?
Well, one of the issues that we deal with these days, Fiery and all this attempted to think they were helping the consumer by putting a hush hush over everything we do so that nobody knows who's doing what. I understand the one about talking to the loan officer because they have a direct effect on where that value can go. But as far as finding out, the only way you're going to know probably is if the appraiser contacts you. Is it Showtime? No, the listing deal. Anyway, if you go through there, you might be able to find out. Most loan officers don't know because, number one, they don't order the appraisal anymore. There is a third party that has the loan officer can't order the appraisal. There has to be a third party. So lenders now use what we call AMCs. They are a third party. And let's say there's 5 people that the lender approves. I'm one of 5. Well, before AMCs came along, I got every 5th appraisal that came up. Now, that still tends to happen because every lender has their list of approved appraisers. But when they have an order, they send it to this third-party AMC out of space somewhere. Then they order it from me. And then when I'm done with it, it goes back to them and then over here. So the direct line between appraiser and lender no longer exists. So that's why they don't know. And it's hard for you to know. And it's great when you put it in there. But the only thing you can do is kind of do a little searching on your own. You could ask the loan officer may or may not know whether or not they see the appraisal. The appraisal gets, in most cases, I think, given to the buyer. So the buyer could see the report. And I had a funny call yesterday from a lady who was trying to close the loan. And they couldn't get a hold of the appraiser to go out and do the final inspection. They tried for 2 weeks. They were calling this particular appraiser. Got it, the appraiser was, I don't know, was gone or something. Never did respond. So she asked me if I could do the report real quick. And I said, well, send it over. I'll look at it. When I looked at the bottom of the appraisal, a different appraiser had signed that report. They were chasing the wrong appraiser. For 2 weeks, they held up that closing. Anyway, the answer is without without seeing the report or getting information. And I know it's required in multi-list. Maybe the lender will tell you if you call.
For those real quick, for us listing agents, when we have to comp them out, we have to put who the appraiser is, put that information in there. I will, when I'm trying to figure out who it is, hopefully I have written it down in my file when the appraiser is called to get it scheduled. And if not, then I will actually look at go into SuperKey and look at that particular lockbox. A lot of times you can determine who the appraiser was through that by when they came in. And then finally, I will have to reach out to the buyer's agent and say, I need to find out who the appraiser is so I can comp this thing out. And I'm not going to comp it out until you provide that information to me.
It's not always accurate in multi-list. I've been given credit for far more properties than I've ever done in this town. You know, if you can't think of somebody,
I've
put
done
their
that
name.
for you before.
Yeah, thanks, Lance. There's a question back
Yes. So real quick, let me repeat the question for those online. The question is, do appraisers know the difference if it's a new mortgage or if it's a refi, and do they go through the same process in selecting appraisers for refis?
They go through the same process for selecting appraisers because you just get the next assignment, whether it's a sale or a refi. And yes, I do know if it's a sale or a refi. In this first box up here on the top of the page I fill out, it says, is it a purchase transaction, refinance, or other? And the way I know is if it's a purchase, I get a copy of the contract. I will know. If it's a refi, I will know when I have to call a homeowner rather than an agent to get in. And believe me, that's another whole story about.
So the question is basically the differences between refinanced appraisals and regular first mortgages. Why our refis tend to be a little higher in price? Would that be a safe way to sum that up?
Let's say different in price. Can we do that?
Different in price.
Well, there's a couple of things. When a house sells, you have a copy of a contract. That's kind of pretty much where things are going to go, unless it's one of those little blips. When I do a refinance, I don't really have a number to speak of. That's the reason I ask the homeowner the information that I get, so I kind of know. And I'm presuming the other appraiser did that and brought in that number. So when you do a refi, it's a little more of a generality than a contract that's a little more specific. That's kind of the best answer I can give you. I think that refis are just a whole different game. Years ago, when we got an order, they'd say the owner thinks it's worth this. Well, they cut that out. We don't know anymore. So what happens though, in some cases, you have seen those, but I've got two on my desk right now that the homeowner thought maybe I was a little low. And so they come back and say, would you reconsider this or whatever? So, it works both ways. I can't tell you without the specific answer. I would recommend this though. If they tell you that a previous number was higher, ask them for a copy of the appraisal. Many times they'll tell me that number, and then when I see the appraisal, that wasn't it at all. Or people tell you that the house next door sold for $500,000. Well, it may have been listed for that, but it probably sold for $450. So check your facts.
Next question, and Nicole, you're gonna have to help me out on this and make sure I understand the question. Is it allowed or does it make a difference to increase the list price to increase the sales price in the MLS when marked pending? So I hope
Like a
you-
lot of listing agents I'm noticing are increasing that list price to what the sales price is on the contract, whether it's 5, 10 more for the appraiser.
You mean after the fact?
Here's the question. Basically, if you have a house that's priced at listed at 150 and it goes under contract for, let's say, 155, the listing agents are going in and changing that to 155, the list price to 155. One, I don't think that that's legal in the MLS. I'm pretty sure that you can't do that. Two, I don't think you can change that list price even after it is sold, because that shows the market, what the market's doing. If it listed at 150 and it sold for 155, that's what all of us, not appraisers included, need to know. So sorry. So if in other words, again, if it's listed at 150 and it goes under contract for 155, the listing agent is not supposed to go in and change that list price.
You know,
Go ahead.
well, first of all, it's illegal to multi-list. Secondly, it doesn't do anybody any good. They've already listed it once. And if you do a change, we can still go back and see what it's previously listed for. And thirdly, we're looking at the contract price, not the list price. So it doesn't do anybody any good.
We had talked about this the other day, and the only thing that I can think of, because you'd asked what's the benefit behind it, I think what the only answer I could come up with is that the company itself, that brokerage, is looking to pad their own numbers when it comes to, well, we sold it for X amount of, our average over sales price or list price is this, or we always get 100% of our list price, whatever the case may be. That's the only benefit I can see on that. So the next question is from April, how do we do price adjustments? That's going to be a CMA class that we will put together. Okay.
I don't mean to interrupt. I just want to give one of the reasons why across the nation people have been changing the list price to match the sale price is because there's a incorrect thought process that if you value the property, when you put the property on the MLS, you have done your due diligence, you've done a CMA, you've talked with the seller, and together you've created a reasonable price. When you get 5, 7, 19 offers on the property and you end up higher than the list price, there is a misnomer thinking that the appraiser is going to say, well, you already valued it. You said it was only worth this. And now because a buyer came in and said it was worth this, we're only going to appraise it to the list price of what you had it at. So there's this misnomer across the nation that you have to raise the list price in order to fool the appraiser that you didn't comp it lower to begin with. And every appraiser out there has proven over and over again, if they're going to get value, they're going to get value. It doesn't matter what the list price was on the property in the MLS. But back before the appraisal management companies, when you used to be able to talk to the appraiser and things were a lot more loose and easy, that may have been a thing, but it hadn't been a thing for a really long time.
Well,
Brenda, do you want to comment on that, Fred?
Well, the list price doesn't affect. We don't adjust to the list price. We only use sale prices. So whatever they're doing doesn't affect, because besides that's after the fact, the appraisal's already done. So, and the appraiser will just use the sale price down the road.
Brenda, thank you. Cindy?
Yeah.
Are you referring to escalating? Okay, escalating. So the question is what does Fred and what do appraisers think of escalation clauses in contracts?
Define escalation clause to me.
So an escalation clause would be, let's say the house is priced listed at 150 and you have multiple offers coming in, and one of those offers says we will pay $1,000 over your best and highest contract up to 160.
You know, I'm not part of the negotiations. You Well, understand that I only get a copy of the completed contract. I'm not privy to any of the negotiations that went on in that deal. So,
They'll have a lot of times they'll have it written in the miscellaneous, or it is an attached addendum to the contract, and whether the appraiser sees the addendum or not is another question. But most of the time we've seen those in the miscellaneous paragraph.
well, it might be in the contract, but that's not an issue to me. You know, whatever number you wind up with, that's the number the appraiser has to deal with, not went up and down or around or any of that kind of stuff. It's where that contract wound up and what's in the contract, because I can read it. Anything you did on the side, that's your business, but it's not anything I'm going to take into account for or adjust for. You know, just as they used to say, give me the facts, ma'am, just the facts.
Next question, and this is from Sherry. With open concept combined living, dining, kitchen, do you still count that as 3 rooms or 1?
That to me is 3 rooms. You still have the 3 functions. And if you had a house that just had a living room and 2 bedrooms, I'm going to go, sound like a studio to me. So yes, I do count the functions that each room should have.
Next question, any adjustments for a repaired, quote unquote, repaired basement shifting, repaired by general contractors per structural inspector report? So just talk a little bit about when you come across basements. You mentioned it earlier this morning about when you see the I-beams and so forth.
When I go in a basement and it's apparent that that it either has I-beams or wall anchors or repaired cracks or whatever, I always take pictures of everything and put it in the report. If the homeowner's there, I ask them if they have a warranty. And if they have a warranty, I say, then would you supply that to the lender so they can send it to me? Because if a house repair has been done by a professional and they provided a warranty, there's a certain amount of understanding there. Plus, if you ever go in a house and you say the basement's been repaired and the buyer moves in and 6 months later we get a 6-inch rain and they get wet, guess what they're going to do? And I know of appraisers in this city that have been sued because they put in their reports that that the basement has been repaired. And you always want to get another layer or somebody between you and the buyer. So if I see something that I have an issue about, I'll call for a basement and structural engineering inspection. That gets somebody else between me, and it benefits you as a broker, it benefits you as an agent, and it benefits me. But it also gets a true picture of what's going on. So many, agents have complained to me, well, you require engineer inspection down there. How come you did that? And I said, well, when they sue you, I don't want to be on your list. They can call you, but not me. It's just good business to cover yourself and to provide protection for your buyers and your sellers as well. If there's a warranty, that needs to be brought into effect too. Sometimes a homeowner will say, oh, I got a warranty on this house. So you know what I do? When I write a report, I make it subject to that warranty showing up. So it gets in somebody's file. So somebody knows that it's repaired. So it wouldn't scare me. Well, it is what it is. I mean, there are certain neighborhoods around here where every house has cracks and issues. So every house you're going to show a buyer, they're going to have to deal with it. But some people have called and said, well, you know, this house has this issue or that. Well, it's your comfort level as to how well you think that's been repaired and taken care of. So,
well, and along those lines, that's what I really like about our seller's disclosure statement is it gives the sellers, property owners, gives them an opportunity to disclose anything and everything. Guys, that seller's disclosure statement is not just 7 pages long. You can add to that as much as you want. Matter of fact, I just had a listing that went under contract. My sellers bought it 2 years ago. Guess what I did? I took the inspection report that they had done 2 years ago, and I made it a part of the seller's disclosure statement. So now the buyer any prospective buyers that come along can see this is what they found 2 years ago. If you have a basement issue like Fred was talking about, if your sellers have the invoices or the bids from the contractor that did the work and the warranty information, include that with the seller's disclosure statement and have the buyers sign it. When they sign it, they have said, oh, yep, you've disclosed to us what's wrong with it, and now it's on them to prove that there's an issue or something wrong with that basement.
that's why when I see electrical boxes or plumbing, you know, I'm not a whole house inspector, but I'm bright enough to see if it's a Federal Pacific box or whatever, you know, that we need to do an inspection. So even a homeowner's inspection, homeowner whole house inspector, that's done for the buyer. And I never see those. And I don't want to see them because once I see something, I'm responsible for it and I'll put it in a report. So you need to, and they, you know, they're not the ones that did the basement. They need to have another layer of protection for the whole house inspector because he can observe, but he's not a licensed contractor to make that repair. So just go down as far down the line as you need to get your backup.
Next question, with builder quality, do you deduct for foundations poured with a quick dry added where walls go up in 5 days versus full 3-week cured foundations?
Well, the answer is I don't know. I don't make adjustments because I just don't have the time. I mean, if we went to check all of the facts, you'd be looking at $2,000 appraisals, you know, and we get far less than that. So we only do what we have time to do, and otherwise we put as many pages of qualifications in there as we can. Although that doesn't keep you from getting sued, believe me.
So now let's address the swimming pool. Not getting out of here without it.
Been ignoring him and he popped up again.
So the question is do you add value? Should we, as realtors, should we be adding values to our CMAs for those have pools? We'll start with in ground and then start with above ground.
Okay, let me start with above ground. No value for above ground. They're easily removed, don't have any kind of a life left in them. I see people that build big decks around them, and that's fine. But once the grandkids are 10 or 12, they're not going to come over to swim anymore. They're gone. So you don't need that pool. Plus, they just deteriorate. So no value for above ground. I'll mention it, put it in the picture. In-ground pools, there are all kinds of qualities. It is frightening how much pools cost these days. I mean, you can't even put a bathtub-sized pool in for 40 grand anymore. 50, 60, $70,000. So if you see somebody that has even a $200,000 house and they spend 50 on a pool, does that increase at 50 overnight? Not in my book. Typically, you'll see 50% or less in an adjustment. Most cases, way less than that. You might see even a $5,000 or $10,000 adjustment. I went to a house a couple of years ago, and the lady opened the door. She says, first thing out of her mouth, she says, "I have a pool. Are you only going to give me $5,000 for that?" I said, "Probably." She'd had an appraisal before, and that's all the appraiser gave her back then. Pools are good and pools are bad. Sometimes pools take up the whole backyard. Personally, I wouldn't buy a house with a pool because my grandkids are too little. I don't want them roaming around. I'll take them to wherever else. There's lots of places to take them to swim these days. So I know pools are beautiful. Some price ranges, there are better investments than others. If I look at $1 million house or a $2 million house, I'm kind of expecting a pool to be back there. But if I look at a $100,000 house, I would be surprised. So you kind of get different grades of cost. Now, one other thing is that you can look at these days is what's common in the neighborhood. If you're in California, probably everybody in your block's got a pool. If you're in Wichita, Kansas, you're probably the only one. Now, the interesting thing is that you can go to the satellite view and you can see how many pools there are in the neighborhood rather than driving by and peeking over fences. It's real easy. Here's my subject. They got a pool. 6 other houses in the neighborhood have a pool. So that probably would help value a little bit. If you're the only pool, you're probably got something that's going to be harder to market, would be my guess. A lot of people wouldn't even look at a house with a pool. So when you put a pool in, you've changed your market from here to maybe down here, and that's why there's less value. So yes, much less value.
Quick on that, the one thing that he told me is you actually need to reduce value if you are in an area that has a lot of pools and your subject property doesn't have one. Right? We can have that discussion.
Can be a detriment. I always tell people to put in pools. I say that's your vacation for the next 10 years because that's where your money went. Otherwise, you didn't put it in the pool, you can go on vacation. So it's not a wise investment. And there are outbuildings, especially out in the county. People build these beautiful, elaborate outbuildings, work on cars and trucks and whatever else. Same thing. The next person comes along may not care about that outbuilding. And again, if I can find comps with outbuildings, I just put outbuilding, no adjustment because they all got one. I don't care if it's this big or this big. You got something outside your house.
Yeah, I just want to add to this because it's kind of a question. I don't know if it's true or not, but I had an appraiser tell me that when they're evaluating exterior amenities such as outbuildings, pools, things like that, it'll never add more than 25% to the value of what the value of the actual property is valued at.
Well, that appraiser may have done some homework and come up with that number. I wouldn't work with a number like that. I would look at each individual situation and see what I thought the return was.
You've mentioned, you talked about another appraiser. One of the things that I like to joke around, and I'm standing over here so he can't reach me. Fred is a very well-respected appraiser here in our market. Obviously, we know that there are some appraisers that we all have talked about around the water cooler that we are not fond of. And so what I will tell you is an appraisal is one person's opinion of the value of that property. You could have 4 different appraisers go out, and the chances of them having the exact same price is slim to none. So a lot of times what I like to do is joke around with my sellers and this is where I don't want you to hit me. It really depends on what side of the bed that appraiser woke up on. Seriously, what type of day they're having, how busy they are, that can adjust to it. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? I know without throwing your peers under the bus, I know I just put you on the spot.
Well, the next time I get an assignment from, what's the name of your company? I have an adjustment for that. Well, appraisers are supposed to interpret the market, not make the market. So if you got an appraiser that's out there that's guiding values, they're not doing what they're supposed to do, and they're not following USPAP. And I'll get into USPAP someday, but Uniform Standards of Appraisal Practice. We have the Appraisal Foundation in Washington, D.C. That watches over us, and of course the Real Estate Board in Topeka that monitors issues as well. So the appraiser, I tell people that houses sell in value ranges, not a house doesn't have a price. it would be easy if we could just say, you're $100,000 house. But no, it might be 105 or it might be 95. And especially if I do something for an estate or somebody up front, I'll say, okay, the form makes me put a number on here, but you can ask more or take less. Now, do you know why we put one number on a report? I could say in a report, this house is worth 100 to 105 and follow USPAP. The only reason a number is on there is so the lender can calculate their loan based on a percentage. So they will loan you 80% of the sale price or the appraisal, the lesser of the two. So that's why a number comes along for the convenience of the lender, basically.
So real quick along those lines, and I'm hoping Brenda will agree with me on this and help me out with a CMA class. She's already put one together not too long ago. Is if we had, like, right from the very beginning of class, Fred said hot sheets or hot numbers. You guys all want to know, well, how much do I adjust for an extra bedroom, or how much do I adjust for a 3-car versus a 2-car garage, and so forth. If there was a standard number for all of us to use, everybody would be doing real estate and there wouldn't be any questions about the pricing on homes. Does that make sense? I mean, so everyone's going to be a little bit different on how they adjust. I may adjust $4,500 for an extra bathroom, whereas Nicole might adjust for $5,000 or $5,500. So every realtor is going to be different, and it's just a matter of being able to calculate a correct CMA and having prices that are within a good ballpark. You don't want to shoot something, way up and above and over when you have no idea. The one thing that's great about our company is that we all get along here. It's kind of like a family. And so we can all collaborate. If you guys ever have questions, come to some of the veterans that have been around. Brenda will take questions. I'll help you out. I've had a number of you guys come to me. What do you think about this? And I just give you based on my experience and what I've seen. And I know I saw you write it down about the call. So I'm going to let you address that. So I just want to make sure everyone understands there is no secret formula. It's different for every person.
Well, I've been in the business almost 50 years, and I still, just the other day, I sent one of my reports to one of my compadres and said, look at this, see if I handle it correctly. I still have fact checks every day with myself and with my information. You don't ever want to quit learning, think you've learned it all. One other thing you might know or not know about appraisals these days, Fannie and Freddie in Washington, D.C., they get millions of appraisals, and they harvest the information off of those appraisals. So their data banks are just chock full of all of the data that we work from. And they can compare what I do to with a report or a comp with any other appraiser that's ever used that. Occasionally, I'll get one from a lender, an underwriter, and say, one of your peers used this comparable and made a different adjustment. Now, then that's scary a little bit that they're cross-checking all of that information now. So getting away with too much wild stuff just doesn't happen anymore because they can cross-check you. And so I have to write them a letter back and say the other guy was nuts. I don't know. No, I have to justify what I did. And, there's good and bad to that side of it.
Hold on a second.
So I'm going to answer that question. What I do, I call Fred and say, my sellers are willing to pay you $350 to come out and do this appraisal because I have no idea.
Well, you call me and I'll give you the names of 3 other appraisers that you can pick from. Okay, there's two. You asked kind of 2 questions. Um, the second one I'll answer by I get a lot of phone calls from people that want me to do an appraisal pre-listing. What should we list it for? Should we sell it for? There's 2 comments for that. Number one is that when your buyer goes to a bank to get a loan, it's going to get another appraisal. So you're going to wind up with 2 appraisals instead of 1. They may or may not agree. When I get a call like that, I spend a lot of time just talking the situation through with the agent. You may not need an appraisal. If somebody calls me out of the blue, my first question is, have you contacted a real estate agent? Go get their information. It's usually free, and I'm not. But I encourage people to let a real estate agent provide them with knowledge up front, because you're on the street every day. I'm sitting in my office basically, except a few days I get out and measure houses. So you have much more current information, and your experience will come in greatly in helping them talk through all the situations. When I go to a house, I can't have near the comments and conversations that you would if you were sitting out there helping to price a house. 2 other things. One is we talked about effective age earlier. If they've modernized a house, then your market, you can compare it to more modern properties. I might have a really old house like that, but I think it's really only maybe has 30 years of effective age. Then I could put a comp on that's 30 years old, because I'm telling you, this house has been brought up to standard to a 30-year-old house. And so these 2 match. Now, does my older house have a little charm, maybe, that I'm counting on to sell this house? Or does it still have post and wiring in the basement? You know, old claw tub in the bathroom or whatever. The bones are still there and they are very old. So what has been done with all of that? Now, you mentioned the outbuildings, going back to that, put their kids out there. And these days, the people are remodeling pool houses and putting their teenager out there. And giving them a separate driveway and said, don't come in the house unless you need to. But there's only a certain market for that. So you've done 2 things, just like a pool. You've created another asset, but is it really marketable? And so how much in the marketplace? We tend to use the term guest quarters these days rather than an older term that we used to use. So, and you want to be careful also that if you have extra quarters, that you don't imply to the lender that it might be rentable. Because if they think you have an income property, things change. They're now loaning on income property, not just a single family residence. So be careful how you list things. I've seen listings, potential rent, help your payment and all this kind of stuff. Just, kind of be careful when you do all of that. Just call them a guest house. Yeah. That way it covers everybody. You've gotten away from any kind of terms, whatever. Are you getting my drift here? Just be as generic as you possibly can. And as far as your property, I'd go down there. You're close to other counties. So I'd look over at Winfield, Ark City, places like that. And my other observation is, let's say it's $1 million house. If I have a buyer that can afford 850 or 900 or $1 million, you can do a search and multi-list and come up with 1 page. Everything is for sale for $1 million. Bingo. You don't have to just look for 2 or 3 comps. I look at sometimes 150 searches, and then I go through them and I search by city, what's for sale, by subdivision, by price range, by basements. If I have a house with no basement, I'll do a multi-list search and see how many sales I have in the neighborhood with no basements and how many with. So you can get about 4 or 5 searches on your table. And if you keep picking out the same comps off of each one of your searches, what do you think? I found a great, a range to work in. So So you will? Well, you can ask him what he's invested, but does he know him? You know, if he's a doctor or whatever, if you just casually ask him, you know, uh, do you know of any other houses in this price range? Uh, you know, maybe any of your friends are had. When I do some big houses that are new, I will call a builder and find out what the cost factors were. May or may not appraise that. I mean, I've done $7, $8, $10 million houses in this town. You don't know they're out there, but they are. And yeah, well, you got to go as far and wide as you think you need to see what people in that price range are buying. And if you see that it's all new houses, that tells you one thing. If you see they're buying older houses, that's another thing that you can put all. You're gonna have to do a lot of searches, in my opinion. And again, getting an appraisal up front doesn't necessarily solve your problem. I know people that want to get one, they want to lay it on the kitchen table and say this is what it's worth. There may be factors come involved when you list that property that I don't know about that makes that appraisal worthless. So it may be too high, too low.
So before we take Lynn's next question, I want to thank all those of you that are online for joining us today. We're going to go ahead and stop the recording now. If there are any other additional questions, we'll keep this up and running so you can hear those questions. But thank you for joining us online. I really appreciate it. Lynn,